For what purpose does Mr. Massey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1808, offered by Mr. Massey of Kentucky. Page 3, line 8, insert quote, but not including any part, combination of parts, component, device, attachment, or accessory that is designed or functions to reduce or increase the force required to activate the trigger of a firearm, quotation before the period.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
And I assure you this is germane. This is a very simple amendment in response.
Does the gentleman insist on this point of order? Gentlemen, the point of order is withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very simple amendment, and it's in response to a lot of concern that gun owners have about this legislation, a particular part of this legislation. The amendment does not seek to change the intent of this bill. It seeks to clarify the intent. There's a section on page 3 from lines 4 to 8 that seeks to ban any part, combination of parts, component, device, attachment, or accessory that is designed or functions to accelerate the rate of fire of a semi-automatic firearm, but not convert the semi-automatic firearm into a machine gun. I assume that the author of this bill inserted this in here to ban bump stocks and any other mechanism that hasn't yet been contemplated that might do something similar to a bump stock. But what a lot of people are concerned about is that this might also, this provision of the law, if it becomes law, might be abused by the ATF to go after gun owners who simply modify the trigger threshold. That is to say, they've either reduced or increased, but most likely reduced, the amount of force that is required to activate the trigger on a firearm. This is a very common modification to a firearm. People are not seeking to turn it into some kind of really rapid semi-automatic fire that simulates machine gun fire like a bump stock might. What they are seeking to do when they modify the trigger is to improve the accuracy of the firearm. But somebody could look at a trigger mechanism and say, you know, if it's easier to pull the trigger, maybe they can shoot this gun faster, and now maybe this provision of the law covers this accessory. And I don't think that's the intent of the author of this bill to ban, for instance, a competition trigger. And so that's why this amendment is offered. There will be a lot of concern in the gun community if this amendment is not accepted. There will be concern that the bill does more than what the authors say they want to do. And so this is a chance for the authors of the amendment and other people here in this committee today to perfect this bill and make sure that it doesn't unintentionally cover people who are shooting any kind of firearm that's had the trigger modified to make it easier to pull so that they can be more accurate. And with that, I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I think what this is intending to get at is a trigger pull modification, and what particularly is concerning in the amendment is it excludes accessories that are designed or function to reduce the force required to activate the trigger, which of course is exactly what we don't want to achieve. And I think this will unfortunately either signal or explicitly invite the manufacturers to figure out a way to work around exactly what the bump stock is intended to prohibit. So I oppose the amendment.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
Does anyone else
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
What point does the gentleman from Ohio?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I just actually would pose the question to my friend from Kentucky who knows more about this stuff than probably any of us. But the way he described it, it seems to me you're potentially talking about people who shoot competitively, athletes who want the right tension on the trigger that's going to help them in a competition. I mean, it doesn't have to be that, but that's what came to my mind. Just as much as I guess someone who's a hunter who's sporting and wants to be accurate when they're hunting. But I'm thinking about the triathlete, whatever in the Olympic Games, the ski and they shoot the what's it called, biathlon?
Biathlon.
Yeah, I'm thinking of those people. Is there any way that this could impact? I mean, I guess not the people who ski. That's probably a different kind of weapon. But I mean, that's the first thing that came to mind.
Absolutely. The type of people who modify their trigger to make it easier to activate so that they can be more accurate, they are not engaged in rapid fire. They are going to take several seconds to acquire, in most cases, to acquire the target and steady the arm and then fire the gun. But if somebody wanted to be overzealous in the prosecution of this law, they could say, oh, well, look, there was a provision put in here, and because that trigger is easier to pull, it is now in violation of this provision of the law. And I know that's not the concern. I'm hoping that's not the intent of the authors, and that's why I want to give them a chance to perfect this section. The amendment that I'm offering would not stop the intent of this provision of the law. If this provision of the law seeks to outlaw bump stocks, it would still outlaw bump stocks, because my amendment would not read on a bump stock. My amendment is drafted to read only on a mechanism or an accessory or component, device, attachment that allows somebody to reduce the amount of force required to activate the trigger. And it is offered in good faith, and it is in response to people who have genuine concerns about the bill. And they're typically competitive shooters.
That's what
They're not out there shooting pop cans as fast as they can. They are acquiring targets, and they're in a competition.
So we can't accommodate veterans with the brace. We can't accommodate domestic violence victims. We can't accommodate citizens living on the border. We can't accommodate employees at pregnancy centers that have been attacked, 50 of them in 11 weeks. And now it looks like we're not going to, Democrats don't want to accommodate athletes who are in competitive shooting, which, again, I just do not get.
If the gentleman would yield me a little bit more time, he brings up a good point. There are some firearms that ship with a trigger that is so hard to pull that unless you've got a lot of hand strength, you're typically going to flinch or pull off because you're exerting. It might be a woman who's using the handgun, and the trigger pull is more than would be natural for her, and so that's another type of person who would seek to accessorize their gun by reducing the amount of force required to activate the trigger. So I think that's another good reason the gentleman brings up to allow this amendment, is so that women won't be at a disadvantage if they want a lighter trigger pull on the firearm.
I thank the gentleman for his expertise and will yield back.